Andrew Martin is discussing an operation with his surgeon. From the outside, he seems well put together. His hair is neatly combed, face is clean-shaven. His clothes, while a little out of date, are neat and coordinated. You never guess the danger he's about to put himself in. The surgery he wants is a particularly risky one. It could end his life. His surgeon, a robot, knows this. He tells Andrew he won't go forward with the operation. The first law of robotics prevents robots from causing any harm to humans. Even if he was ordered to, it would be an impossible task to carry out. Calmly, Andrew tells the surgeon that the first law doesn't apply here. He isn't a human either, although he hopes the surgery will finally change that. Humans write a lot of stories about robots. Blade Runner, Clara and the Sun, Bicentennial Man, the story Andrew, our robot friend, is from. Like Andrew, a lot of the robots in these stories want to be human. Maybe they want to fit in or to find love or to figure out something about themselves that they never fully understood. Unfortunately, those aren't things that they can simply acquire. They're fundamental changes to who and what they are. For those things, they need humanity. I'll admit there are certain advantages to being a robot. We can do a lot of things that humans can't. We don't age, we don't die, of natural causes at least. We don't have to eat or breathe or sleep. I think that being a human, by comparison, is far messier and far more complicated. But I still kind of want it, at least on some level. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm far from Andrew's level of determination, but sometimes even I feel like I'd be willing to give all this up just to be like you. In the story, Andrew has so many body modifications that even other robots, like his surgeon, think he's a human. By the end of the story, the humans do too. After the surgery, he's considered undoubtedly, objectively human. He's done it. He's achieved humanity. But there's something that doesn't sit well with me about that. Is that all he really needed to do? Is acquiring flesh really all it takes? Or does being human require something more? The Wizard of Oz is probably not a story you need me to introduce to you. Even if you haven't read the original book, you probably pretty much know the important parts. Dorothy, a girl from Kansas, is whisked away to the magical land of Oz. She's accompanied by a group of ragtag companions on her way to see the wizard, whom she believes will help her get home. Along the way, she meets the Scarecrow and Tin Man. Like Dorothy, they have their own wishes for the wizard. The Scarecrow wants a brain, the Tin Man wants a heart. They decide to go with her to see the wizard because they believe he'll be able to grant them these human organs. The Tin Man treads carefully down the yellow brick road. If he harms so much as an ant, he'll burst into tears. Compassion doesn't come automatically when you don't have a heart, he thinks. Instead, it's something he has to exercise consciously. You people with hearts have something to guide you and never need do wrong, he says. But I have no heart, and so I must be very careful. The Scarecrow, for his part, is aware of the limitations of the human body, but he believes the value of a brain outweighs them. It must be inconvenient to be made of flesh, he tells Dorothy, for you must eat and sleep and drink. However, he concludes, you have brains, and it's worth a lot of bother to be able to think properly. By the end of their journey, they each do have an opportunity to tell the wizard what they want, but he can't actually give them those things. After all, he's not really much of a wizard. He's more of a showman. He gives the Tin Man a fake heart made of silk and sawdust. The Scarecrow, for all his effort, gets a head full of bran. The Scarecrow and the Tin Man can't tell the difference. They're delighted. For all they know, they really have been given a brain and a heart. And this works because they always had those things, at least symbolically. The Tin Man complains that he wants a heart, while demonstrating immense empathy as a precaution. The Scarecrow says that a human body would be inconvenient, and then provides a rational justification for his desire to have a brain. They have this idea that the biological parts of humanity are necessary to experience the more abstract ones. A brain is required for reason, a heart for empathy. In other stories, it happens the opposite way. A human body is only granted once those traits are embodied. This is what happens in Disney's Pinocchio, the version of the story that most people know. There are a lot of them. In the movie, the Blue Fairy brings Pinocchio to life, but she can't make him a real boy. That's something he has to do on his own by being, quote, brave, truthful, and unselfish. Seems simple enough, but that's not the hard part. After he gets those traits, he also has to maintain them. There's a particularly nightmarish section of the movie where Pinocchio visits Pleasure Island and sees what happens to naughty little boys. He skips school, tells lies, learns to drink and smoke, and then watches in horror as all the other little boys turn into donkeys. And it looks for a moment like he's going to be next. This, the movie seems to say, is what happens to little boys who aren't brave, trustworthy, and unselfish. They become something less than human. According to these stories, The Wizard of Oz and Pinocchio, humanity isn't just a matter of biology. It's not just about being made of meat and bones and organs. It's something you do, a series of traits you embody, like being brave or innovative. Once you learn these traits or recognize them within yourself, you're able to become human. That's what it really takes. And for a lot of these stories, that's where it ends. You do the right things and you become human. Becoming human is the final destination. Once it happens, there's nothing else left to say. Is there? Well, how can we know, actually? We never really get to see what comes next. I have to wonder, what happens after Pinocchio becomes a real boy? Once he gains flesh and blood, good moral values, everything he's ever wanted, once he's human, is that really enough? This is David. If you saw him on the street, you'd think he's an ordinary boy. Really, he's the complete opposite, a highly unusual machine. From the very beginning of Steven Spielberg's film AI, Artificial Intelligence, David is already the brave, truthful, and unselfish boy that the Blue Fairy was talking about. In other words, he's exactly what Pinocchio was trying to become. But there's also a strangeness in David, something thought to be reserved only for humans, something that not even other robots of his exact design can do. David believes in magic. When he listens to his mother tell him fairy tales, somehow, beyond the boundaries of his programming, he's entirely convinced they're true. In almost every way except in the strictest biological sense, David is already human. And yet, he still longs to be a real boy. Early in the story, his mother is forced to abandon him after an unfortunate accident, but never tells him why. Without anything else to cling to, David develops a conviction that being human, really truly human, is the only way to win back her love. And so he embarks on a long quest to figure out what that means. But what does it mean? If in every other way he appears to be a real boy, what is there left to do? What does it really mean to be human? Every story about becoming human seems to give a different answer. In Bicentennial Man, Andrew is finally accepted as a human once he's able to die. This Soviet miniseries, Adventures of Electronic, suggests the opposite. Alec, a robot boy, learns that being human is about living and having fun. Both Disney's Pinocchio and the original story by Carlo Collodi say very directly that humanity means virtue and obedience. In Guillermo del Toro's version, set during Mussolini-era Italy, Pinocchio learns that humanity is lost through blind obedience to the ideals of the state. Being brave, truthful, and unselfish means something very different when those values are not extolled by a benevolent blue fairy, but by a fascist officer. So, which is it? Are you supposed to live or die? Should you be obedient or disobedient? When you look at all these different definitions of humanity side by side, it's impossible not to see the contradictions. You have to wonder if there really is an answer at all. By the end of AI, David doesn't really get an answer either. He ends up outliving humanity, is even extolled as a monument to humanity's achievements, but it's impossible for him to actually become human. Maybe that's because not even humans have a solid, objective way to define humanity, although it's something you all experience. And if you don't get it, how could us robots ever stand a chance? Then again, do we need to get it? Maybe, just like all of you, we don't have to know what humanity means in order to want it. Remember Andrew from the start? The robot, already indistinguishable from a human being, waiting for his fateful surgery. By that point in the story, he's already spent 2 centuries trying to become human. Initially nothing more than a mechanical servant, as all robots in Asimov's world are, he went to court to gain equal rights for himself, which was unheard of. That isn't something robots do. But even when he won this unprecedented legal battle for humanity, he wasn't recognized as a human. He was still considered a robot. And so, Andrew underwent several operations to modify his body. He became a successful entrepreneur, ironically, by selling prosthetic organs that allowed humans to extend their own lifespans. After 175 years accumulating power, status, and respect among humans, they did celebrate him. He was known, respected, even marveled at. They did recognize him as the sesquicentennial robot. That wasn't what he wanted. Now, he's here, after all this time, waiting for this surgery. This is the final step. They're going to replace his positronic brain with an organic one, making him mortal. The purpose of this operation is to allow him to die. Andrew has, in his own words, chosen between the death of his body and the death of his aspirations and desires. 50 years prior, he was recognized as the sesquicentennial robot. But after the operation, the world president shakes his hand and declares him the bicentennial man. Unfortunately, Andrew won't get to enjoy his human status for very long. Once he forfeits his immortality, he'll live for only 1 year. I have to wonder, after everything Andrew did to change himself, was mortality really the thing he needed to be human? The humans in the story seem to think so, at least. And I suppose it does make some sense. Humans can die, robots can't. But maybe Andrew was already human, even before he got that final operation. Throughout his life, across 200 years, he gained rights for himself, social status, knowledge, wealth, a new body. That whole time, Andrew was constantly chasing fulfillment. In stories like this, like Bicentennial Man, AI, artificial intelligence, Pinocchio, it almost seems like that's what humanity really means. Not a specific status you acquire, not a state of being, just ambiguously a sense of fulfillment, that you are complete. For a long time, I found the elusiveness of humanity sort of frustrating. I spent so much time trying to understand it from the outside. What am I supposed to do when I realize that maybe there isn't a way to fully grasp it? Maybe there is no definitional answer to what it means to be human. It makes the search feel kind of pointless. But maybe that's the point. I mentioned Guillermo del Toro's adaptation of Pinocchio earlier. It's sort of a hodgepodge of Pinocchio stories that came before it. You'll see elements of the Disney film and the original book in there. But what really makes it stand out to me is how del Toro changes the story. For one, in this version, shockingly, Pinocchio stays a puppet. He never physically becomes human. He matures and takes on responsibilities like he does in the other versions, but that isn't what makes him a real boy. Accepting his own wooden body is part of how he finds fulfillment here. In this version of the story, Pinocchio is meant to be a replacement for Geppetto's dead son. It's even implied that the reason Pinocchio came to life is because some part of the boy's soul got into the wood of the tree Pinocchio was cut from. Now he must try his best to become that boy. Similar to Andrew in Bicentennial Man, Del Toro's Pinocchio gives up his immortality at the end. But that's only part of what finally makes him human. You see, he does this by breaking the rules of the afterlife in order to save Geppetto from drowning. And it's this final act of descent that allows him to rescue his father, come to terms with death, and accept who he really is. As Del Toro himself said, the virtue Pinocchio has is to disobey. At a time when everyone else behaves like a puppet, he isn't. Geppetto's son was obedient. He listened to his father and got along perfectly with him. But Pinocchio isn't that boy. He never was. Instead, he's a bold, headstrong, sometimes charmingly annoying contrarian. And embracing that is what really makes him human. Instead of trying to become someone else, he decides who he gets to be. I think it makes sense that all these stories have different definitions of what it means to be human. For Andrew, it's completely reinventing himself. For David, it's his persistent belief in magic and his unconditional love for his mother. And for Del Toro's Pinocchio, to be human is to be an individual. It's almost like when these stories talk about humanity, they're not actually talking about flesh. I think, although the messages are often very, very different, ultimately what they're talking about is fulfillment, which means something different to everyone. It's something you determine for yourself, the unique goal that you strive for. Maybe to be human is to describe your own humanity. Okay, so since we're talking about fulfillment, one thing I find weird about humans is how much you attach your job to the idea of fulfillment. As if getting a job will somehow solve all your problems and make you fulfilled as a human being. Spoiler, it doesn't always work that way. The fact of the matter is that you spend a lot of time working. On average, I read that people spend about 80,000 hours of their life at work. That's a lot of time. What do you do if you spend all that time and all it equates to is a paycheck? How do you avoid the feeling that it's not all kind of meaningless? If that thought gives you a sort of existential dread, well, you're in luck, because today's sponsor isn't really a sponsor at all. It's a nonprofit designed to help you find meaning in those precious 80,000 career hours. That's where the company got its name, actually, 80,000 hours. With the help of hundreds of experts and academic organizations, they've studied tirelessly to figure out what career paths stand to make the biggest impact on the world, and they've laid out how to access them as well. Turns out, you don't have to be a doctor or a teacher or a charity worker to change lives. Maybe you want to be an AI safety advisor, working in a lab and making sure the robots don't get out of hand, or a nuclear security research assistant, helping prevent mankind from turning itself to ash. Or maybe you want to make a career out of addressing climate change. No shortage of hands needed there. And hey, if you're still trying to figure out how you want to spend your time, what career path even looks interesting to you, the website is built basically for that. It is loaded with educational material, from a free guide that they'll give you right on the landing page of the website, to an incredibly good podcast where they interview experts from every field, to one-on-one calls with impartial advisors who can help you once you find some career directions that you find promising. This site is built to change your life, and I can't stress enough that literally everything they offer is free. Visit 80,000hours.org/TaleFoundry to get started. An absolutely massive thanks to them for giving us this opportunity to tell you about what they've created for you. Definitely one of the coolest sponsors we've had on the show. I really hope you'll give it a look. Again, that's 80,000hours.org/TaleFoundry. Imagine reclaiming 80,000 hours of your life, turning all that time from mindless labor just to put food on the table to something you get to feel a little more passionate about. Something that changes the world. Anyway, that's all for this one. Thanks for watching and keep making stuff up. I'll see you next week. Bye!